Everybody, Bijan Tagavi here from Cleveland, Ohio. I'm actually in the studios of Robert Estrin, who I studied classical piano with ever since I was a young child, and he's been a mentor to me to this date. And I studied all the monumental classical works under him, from Bach to Beethoven to Chopin to Rachmaninoff to the Grieg Piano Concerto to everything. And he taught me all I know about piano technique and how to play the piano. So I want to share with you 3 tips that I've learned from Robert, and a question that I get asked a lot by non-classically trained jazz pianists is about piano technique. So today I want to share some of that wisdom for you. I'm going to give you 3 tips, okay? The first thing, this is something that Robert would emphasize all the time. The first thing is knowing when to utilize the different parts of the body. Okay, so what does that mean? There are 3 parts of the body when it comes to playing the piano. There's the arms, the wrist, and the fingers. And knowing when to use which part of the body is essential to having good piano technique. It comes down to basic physics, a balance of speed and power. The more speed you need, you can't get as much power. The more power you need, you can't get as much speed. Okay, so let's break that down. When do you use the arms? We use the arms when you need maximum power. So an example of that is, if you're setting up some big chords, if you're playing some big chords, maybe like a, play big chords like that, that's when you use the arms, okay? When to use the wrist, okay? The wrist is sort of a balance of speed and power, right? Where the fingers is when you need maximum speed, okay? The fingers is if you're playing double time 16th note lines, for example, that's where you can use the fingers. If you're doing something like that, that's when you would use the fingers. Now, the wrist is a balance of that, okay? Sometimes you're in situations where maybe you're accompanying a sax player who's soloing, and you're playing in a group setting with bass and drums, and you're in the rhythm section, and you need to comp and produce sound, but maybe you have some comping figures like this. So that's where you have to use the wrist, okay? And I could do a whole lesson about how to use the wrist, because it's not as easy as it seems. A lot of times when I have students try to play with the wrists, they see how it looks, but then when they try to do it, they end up using the arm. So it's really important that you make sure you're only using the wrist. The arm is not moving at all. So you can see there when I'm playing some of those repeated figures, like. So that's when you need to use the wrists, okay? Because the fingers are too weak in order to play something like that, right? So those are the 3 parts of the body. That's the first tip, knowing when to utilize the arms versus the wrists versus the fingers. The second tip is sort of related to that. It's making sure to strike from the surface of the keys, not above. That's essential to getting a really beautiful, pretty sound out of the piano, is to strike from the surface of the keys. Now, it applies to all of those aspects of the body. For example, when you're using the arms, even though you're using the arms, you still want to be over the keys ahead of time, okay? You want to prepare over the keys. You want to strike from the surface, not from above, okay? Even if you're playing a big chord, if you're playing something like, right? The idea is not to go, because then you'll get a really harsh slapping sound, right? If I just play a bunch of chords, right, I'm going to get a really harsh sound. Now, I can get the same big sound out of the piano by striking from the surface and leaning with the weight of the arm. Check this out. Right? So you see, I'm still getting a big sound out of the piano, but I'm not coming from above like that. I'm striking from the surface. I'm on the keys first, and then I push the weight of the arm into the keys. Right? Really essential to strike from the surface of the keys. This applies when you're, especially when you're using the fingers. You have to do this just in order to play fast, because if you try to strike from above, you're not going to be able to play lines in time, right? Maybe at a slower tempo if you're, yeah, maybe there you can. right? But you're not going to be able to do that if the tempo is faster, right? You're not going to be able to go, right? It's going to be too slow. So if you're playing lines, double time 16th note lines, you're going to need to be able to strike from the surface of the keys. Right? So really important that you're striking from the surface of the keys. Okay? The third and final tip that I want to give you that I learned from Robert is delineating the top note and controlling the balance of voicings. Okay? And what does that mean? That means when you're playing a chord, not all notes are created equal. Okay? Not all notes are supposed to have the same dynamic level. What does that mean? Let's say we're harmonizing a melody to a ballad. Okay? I'll do Everything Happens to Me, beautiful classic jazz ballad. A lot of times the way I hear students play this tune is something like this. Okay, and that's fine. Voicings are good and everything. Also, another thing that I'm going to talk about another lesson is get off the pedal. That's a big thing I learned from Robert, the importance of practicing without the pedal. But that's an aside. When it comes to playing voicings, you need to be able to balance the voicing, right? Have good dynamics with each individual voice. And that's not an easy thing to do, to be able to control the voices. But in that situation, what could you imagine you want to bring out more than everything else? Is the melody, right? The melody is the main voice that you want to bring out, that top note oftentimes. And you got to keep in mind, not everything's going to come out equally because your pinky is the weakest finger, right? And if you're playing with two-handed voicings, oftentimes the melodies are being played with the top notes, either the fourth or fifth finger. And those are your weakest fingers. Therefore, already when you play with equal force, those are going to be swallowed up by your other fingers. So the other voices are going to dominate that melody, okay? But if you want to bring out that top voice in particular, remember that not only do you have to make that voice louder, but you also have to diminish the volume of the other voices. So it's really important to be able to control the voicing. If we played Everything Happens to Me, check out the sound when I bring out the top note. Even if you have some inner voice motion, right, you want those voices to be softer than the top note, okay? Now, how do you do this, right? Because this is not such a self-explanatory thing. Well, you want to sort of reach, right? It's this feeling of reaching. Robert would always describe it as reaching for the top note. And sometimes I relate it to like twisting a doorknob a little bit, but you really want to be reaching with that top finger, right? It's almost like you're trying to just grab something with your pinky or something. Right, you see I'm reaching for that? Right, really important that the top note's coming out more than those tenor voices, the alto voices, those middle voices. Otherwise, we don't want to hear that. What we want to hear is that top note, right? Another practice technique for that Robert once showed me is a varying articulation, right? Because if you can control different articulations, you'll also be able to control different dynamics. So let's say you want to bring out the bass note and the top note. Try to keep those legato, and the inside voices make that staccato. Right? And you could try it just with the top note by itself too. Right? So It's much more difficult than it seems. So you're going to want to take all these things slower and work on these in small chunks. Anyway, I hope this lesson was really helpful for you. Robert was such an important influence for me, even beyond music, just with life in general, but especially when it comes to the piano. He taught me so much about technique, and those 3 tips are going to be really important for you, especially if you're not classically trained. To be aware of that, I think is going to be really important and help you out a lot. Okay? So until next time, take care. Please subscribe to the channel. There's going to be a lot more great content. So stay tuned for more content here. Like this video, share it with your friends. Until next time, take care.